This is Terry Shower, and I'm here to help you reach financial freedom, invest anywhere in North America, and get your life back with real estate invest. Today's show responds to a really common concern many people have, and that is luck. Picking the right deal, the right market, good or bad tenants, timing economic cycles. If it all boils down to luck, isn't real estate investing super risky? Well, who better to tell us about the rules of so-called luck than a professional poker player?
Before we jump in and hear from the expert, I just want to get a couple of ground concepts out of the way. And so the first one is this idea of luck. And with my coaching students, something comes up again and again. And this is the idea of I just got lucky or it's all random. And so people commonly who have done like one or two deals and they're kind of, angsting about moving forward and scaling, going into the next project, I hear very often people say, well, what if I just got lucky? And I have this sneaking suspicion that, with my first deal, I just made a good decision and got lucky. And like, what if I'm not able to repeat that? The other thing that I hear a lot is comments about the randomness of the market. And so this is basically like, the fear-driven thought process that comes from, if this market is this extremely complex thing that I don't know about, because, if you're kind of in that zone where you've been, maybe following listings for a while, you have a bit of knowledge about the market, but you've not been in the real estate business for long enough, you've not been investing long enough to watch multiple cycles and to see the cumulated effects that ownership can bring you over time financially, the whole thing just seems like a black box. And having a lot of your money tied up in a black box can be super scary. And so the two sides of this coin that, make real estate investing seem a little bit like gambling are this luck factor. So people believing that the performance that they've had on one or two investments in the past is a question of luck, or else believing that the market is just like gambling. And so that's kind of like a fear that when I have this inchoate risk that's hanging over my head because I don't understand the different variables that are involved. And even if I do understand them, for me as somebody who's been doing this for 20 years, I got completely blindsided during COVID when none of us knew what was going to happen. But if you are able to kind of demystify some of what's around risk, what is lurking around these systems in which we don't have short-term prediction, but there is long-term certainty, this is exactly the kind of niche in which the wisdom that comes from playing poker is extremely applicable to help you get over some of those hurdles in your real estate investing life and to really begin to think about that luck aspect or else that fear, that uncertainty aspect, and to be able to put it in a box that's going to allow you to be able to move forward anyway, irrespective of some of those short-term feelings that you might have. And so before we get into some of those tactics, I think one of the things that we need to understand is that us as human beings, we are hardwired to avoid loss. And there are actually studies on this where when you look at the positive bump or like the positive feelings that are associated with having something good happen to us are actually experienced with remarkably less intensity than when we lose something or when something bad happens to us. And so, us as human beings, in terms of how our emotional systems work, we are hardwired to avoid loss. And so what this can create in the realm of investing is that markets are inherently volatile. And this goes for stocks as the same as it does for real estate. And when some of those short-term hiccups happen, or when some short-term volatility happens, this is taken by our emotional system as a get out message. And so if you think of like the last, 3-4 years, which have been some of the most volatile that I've ever experienced in my 20-year career with COVID, we have interest rates going up, we have uncertainty of whether or not tenants are going to be paying, we have, the doom and gloom about a potential recession coming. Like all of these are signs that point to a certain amount of volatility. And so when you have those swings of short-term variance, so that variability of the market goes up, the market goes down, oh, now it's over here, now it's over there, this can be extremely anxiety provoking and can make it very difficult for us as investors to make decisions and to stick with our long-term plan. And so who better to inform that decision making than somebody who is a professional gambler? Because even if you're gambling, it's not completely unpredictable. Like when you're playing poker or involved in some kind of other game like that you're doing strategically, much like investing, you're making decisions with a certain amount of information and a long-term trend pattern. And so how you're able to make your decisions within that scheme in which there's short-term volatility is going to determine your performance long-term as an investor. And so the real nugget or the real thing that there is to understand here is how are you going to process those short-term reactions versus the long-term outcomes that you want to gain and be able to stay the course despite the fact that in the short term, you might be feeling some kind of fear. And so like a great way to think about this is if you think about, 2008 in the real estate market, or you think of the latest stock market wobble, like people who fire sold their assets in those moments are the ones who ended up being the biggest losers. If you were to look at any 10-year time slice in investing, the trend is ultimately upwards. And even if you include 2008 in that, so let's say were to take a time slice from 2003 all the way up to 2015 if you're in the US, and you were to look at the big event that happened in 2008, if you had held your portfolio for that 10-year time period, you would be richer despite the wobbles. And so very often being able to sit through those short-term volatile moments has to do with just understanding that in the long term, there is an upward trend despite that variance. And then one of the other concepts that's really great is this idea of controlled aggression. And so when you're looking at how to move through some of those moments of indecision where maybe the risk seems just a little bit too loud to you, it's also a question of understanding that, us as human beings, because we're so loss averse, very often that puts us into fight or flight mode. When our mind sees some kind of a risk on the horizon, we get into fight or flight mode. And so the flight mode might have to do with some version of shutdown. In real estate investing, the most common one that we see as coaches is we call it analysis paralysis, right? So like people will tell themselves all kinds of stories about why doing another deal is not a good idea. It's not the right time. It's not the right location. I don't have all the information. Whatever version of analysis paralysis you're trapped in, understand that that's basically your fight or flight mechanism putting you into doe in the headlights mode. So like that's what in real estate investing, that's what analysis paralysis is. It's really turning into a doe in the headlights and being like, I'm just going to not move because as long as I don't make any decision, I'm not making the wrong decision. That's a type of flight. The other type of flight is to run screaming in the opposite direction and try to get yourself out of that situation. And so, I do also see this with some of my clients and some of my students when, they will go all the way up to signing the offer and then all of a sudden they're ghosting. Or they'll sign an offer and then they get nervous and then they want to bail, even though there is nothing that within the deal itself that is showing a red flag. And so like that is how the flight activation, like when your fight or flight mechanism gets activated and you pick the flight option, that's designed to protect you, but it's also going to prevent you from moving forward. And so what is controlled aggression in the sphere of real estate investing? Well, it's learning to activate your fight mechanism and this kind of like aggression with which we're naturally wired, and then to understand how to bring that into your business dealings as a way to get you to move through a perception of risk. Because naturally, as human beings who function the way we function, when we feel fear, we're going to either tip into fight mode or flight mode. And how do you learn to activate, how do you exist in that fight mode that's going to help you get through some of those moments of discomfort? And so without further ado, let's hear from our guest, who's probably going to put this with a little bit more elegance than I have.
So without further ado, let's just jump right in. I've got my guest today, Pasha Esfendiary. Pasha, thanks for joining me today.
I'm really excited to be on this show. You have great energy. I think it's going to be really fun.
That was the sense I got off camera. So Pasha, you came to the world of real estate investing from the world of professional poker playing. So like, I need to hear that story. Like what happened there?
Okay, so I went off the traditional path. I mean, everyone typically will go to college, especially if you come from a Persian family, you have to go to college or a lawyer, an engineer, or real estate is your like only other option if you don't do those things, right? So growing up, I didn't have a master plan. What I did know is that I picked up concepts and I loved games very, very much. And so I always excelled in school, but I hated doing homework. So I didn't really get the result of the good grades. And I just said, once I got to college, I just said, I can't do this. Like mentally, it was just pain and torture for me, just sitting in the slow class. And so I dropped out of college, not with a really master plan, but coincidence would have it around that time, my brother ended up winning a poker tournament, and he ended up winning $1.4 million, which my brother's one of like the winningest poker players in the world, right? So I was like, well, if he could do it, I could do it. Like, I know how smart he is, and so I could do this too. And so I started playing poker at a young age, and I just picked it up really quickly. I just picked up that everyone else in poker was really timid and conservative, and so you have to just adapt to your opponents. That's what gaming is, right? You just the person who adapts faster. So I just became really aggressive, and that really led me into about my 25, 26 years old, and I just played professional poker, did pretty damn well, traveled the world, had my fun with it. But I really realized at that 25-year mark, 26-year mark, that this wasn't for me. And my end game was always real estate. I always wanted to get into real estate. I knew that as a child, that was the key to wealth. So I took the bankroll that I had, and I went, well, let me back up. I went and interned because I had no idea what to do for real estate investing. So I had met a friend through poker who had a very, very successful company. And I was like, hey, can I just work for you for free? Let me just learn, and I'll just basically, you just tell me what to do. I'll be your intern, right? Which he thought it was a joke, but it wasn't. And so I went and interned for him for 3 months, and he taught me how to do flips. And so I took that knowledge, went back to Vegas, and I bought my first flip from an auction sight unseen, which actually happened to be a mobile home, which is just, it's not like an actual stick-built home, but, they put on a pad and it doesn't really move, but it can. And I made all the mistakes in the world, made $3,000 net, not even including taxes, because, then I don't even know how much capital gains tax was. And then I caught the bug, and I said, this isn't for me. And now I can build on this experience. And then I just went headfirst into real estate. And I've been doing it now for about 13, 14 years.
Okay. Yeah. So I love the story. I love the, having a bit of a challenge with, the school pace, and then turning that into like a poker career. And like, I have to ask, like, what are some of the skills that you feel like have transferred from that life? Because like, I had a previous life as a semi-pro martial artist, and like pretty much everything that I do in real estate mentally comes from combat sports, because you just have to have such a solid mindset in that environment in order to like just be able to show up and play your best, right? Because it's like that's an environment where like either you're going to get a bone broken or you're going to get knocked out or something. And so like you have to really mentally be very aligned in order to thrive in that space. And like I'm assuming that in poker some of those things are similar. And so like I'm just really curious to hear about like what's that as a life experience that you can then transfer into real estate.
Yeah, absolutely. There's two things that stick out the most, and there's a lot of other little nuances that we could talk about. But the main one is poker really taught you how to be a long-term thinker, right? Because in poker, you could have what we call a short-term variance. You could do everything right, no matter what, and still just keep losing. And I've had that. I've had 6 months of just losing, and it's just you're like I'm pretty sure I did everything right. Then you start to question yourself, all this, but you still make the right decision based on the long-term result, right? For example, if I have a 55% favorite over somebody else's 45% favorite, I mean, technically you're supposed to stick all your money in, right? And you might lose 10 of those flips in a row because they might hit that 45%. But in the long run, if you do it over a million times, you're going to win 10% more, which is massive when you think about it. So thinking really long-term in real estate is really the key to wealth, in my opinion, right? And so just delaying gratification. So everything that I do, I literally think 10, 20 years down the line. How I evaluate properties is, will I enjoy this property 10 years from now, right? It also helps you edge out short-term variance in real estate, right? Interest rates go up, interest rates go down, something happens, but if you're keeping it long-term, it's going to be a great investment because we can't stop printing money, and that's a whole nother subject. The second thing is it teaches you that you have to be aggressive. If you don't learn on how to be aggressive in poker, you will lose. You just will get blinded off, right? That's what I call it. It's like just getting blinded off. It's like, for example, if you go buy into a tournament and you just sit there, what we know is that the antes keep going up with time. And if you keep waiting for a good hand to come your way, you're just going to get blinded. You're just going to lose. You don't even put yourself in a position to try to win. And I see this happen in poker, and I see this happen in real life and in real estate investing and just building something, because you're not being aggressive. What I just mean by aggressive is just having a plan, sticking to it, and going after whatever your niche is or whatever you want to do with the education that you get for it, and then just attacking it, right? And just putting yourself out there, and then just knowing that it's never going to be perfect and you're just going to keep learning. So Those are two major ones. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like I really love the way you put that so succinctly and clearly. And like, there's a lot of information. So I'm going to just go back to the first one, first of all. So, like, I love the vocabulary of short term variance. And like, I feel like intuitively I know what that is. But the value of having just the perfect vocabulary for something is that it allows you to kind of put a concept in a nutshell and
Yeah.
then work with it conceptually, because it becomes very clear by having the right word to stick on it what that thing is, right? Like if I only have the word furniture to describe chairs, tables, the lights, everything else, I'm like lumping everything, and I'll have a gut feeling that like this is a chair. But until I parse that out and like really stick a label on it, it's going to be difficult for me to kind of deal with that. So like I love the term. Do you think like you can just unpack that for me a little bit more clearly in terms of how that translates into real estate?
Sure. Yeah, absolutely. So I think that the lowest hanging fruit there is I always tell people, so many people come up to me and say, "Hey, should I buy a house in this time?" And my only question is this: do you plan on keeping it for 10 years or longer? That's my first question every single time without fail. The reason being is that if you're going to go in and you're going to, let's say, buy a single family home, and you think it's going to appreciate X amount, but it's difficult to really kind of underwrite that. You don't know what the market's going to do a year, 2 years, 3 years. And we've just noticed that, right? Like this is a perfect example. The interest rates just rose incredibly, and it's hurting a lot of people because of it. But like, for example, my strategy is I will buy a property and I'll never sell it, right? Like that's the plan. And so what happens is I can maneuver around short-term variance because my plan has always been long-term. So no matter what happens in this next 3 years, I know in 10 years, I can confidently say that I do know that inflation is going to happen. And I do know that our governments, both of our governments, are going to keep printing more money, which causes more inflation, which causes my assets to keep appreciating. And I can say that with such confidence. So now I'm getting rid of short-term variance. I'm getting rid of risk point failures because of that. And also I'm building up a machine and snowballing the effect of it. So it's really just understanding what your strategy is. If you're going to get in and get out, you better know your numbers, and you better be super conservative about your numbers, because you just should not put a lot of effort and a lot of emphasis, in my opinion, on what I call hoping, right? I'm going to get this house, I'm going to do all the repairs, and then I hope the market does better. If you ever say that in any circumstance of investing, don't invest. You should never hope. You should just say, I can confidently say with the numbers that I've underwritten, I'm here. So
I love that that's the advice from an ex-professional gambler, because you just basically said, "Don't gamble." And,
yeah,
I think that's like so spot on. I had a financial planner on the show a little while ago, and he had such a nice delineation between investing and speculating. And he's like, "Look, you don't want to be a speculator. Like when the market," and he was a financial planner, so he's working in stocks, but he's like, when the market takes a blip and you're speculating, so like somebody who might be like trying to short-term flip or like do whatever it is, like that is so much more risky than investing. And investing is like basically you have that 5-10 year time frame, and
yeah,
when you look back statistically that over a 10-year time frame, like those momentary market blips, like what happened during COVID, or even what happened in 2008, like in the States, we didn't have that event in Canada in the same way. But like if you look at a 10-year period from like, let's say 2003 to 2013 or something, like even something as extreme as that irons itself out with time. So, that difference between, the gambling or the speculating or the hoping about what the market's going to do, if you just push your time window out long enough, you have to be able to have the resources to negotiate around some of those short-term wobbles. And this is I'm sort of in more conventional like buy and hold business model of multifamily. And so like for me, it's always a question of like, as long as my tenants are going to pay the rent and I have enough tenants paying rent that's going to keep the building standing, like that's basically my risk level there. Right. Is I
right.
have to not over leverage to the point where I can't, keep that building running. And then as long as I have tenants, I can keep the ball rolling. Right. So it's about being able to carry the weight of the overhead or the weight of the asset around a small term bounce until you're able to sell at a profit later on, if you even want to sell at all.
Yeah. I think you bring up a really good point. And I don't know why this reminds me of it, but I'm such a big believer in tech. Like tech is always going to win in the long run. I mean, it's changed our lives. It will continue to change our lives. But if you look at something like VR, right? And Meta, Facebook, put out these VR things. I think they personally suck. Gave me a headache. don't like them. But then but you start to think about where is our human nature going. We always want convenience and we always want things at instant gratification. So human nature is going to push us there. So relating this back to short-term variance, Meta came out, VR flopped for them, but the trend, if you believe in it, in 20 years from now, there's going to be big winners. Like VR is going to change our whole life. And so, people get really focused on like, the short-term variance, this sucks. Like I just lost a bunch of money on VR, but you shouldn't stop investing in something you believe in, because what I promise you is, please don't take my advice on this, by the way. I'm not an expert on this, but it's just things I think about. But in 20 years from now, we're going to do meetings with VR. Like I'm going to be able to do this podcast with you, Terrie, with VR, and we'll be right next to each other in a room that's created in the digital world, and everything's going, so it's just, that's just like an example of short-term variance. It's just like, you think long-term, think 20 years from now, and it makes this decisions a lot easier in your personal life and in your investing career.
Yeah. No, I think that's really great advice. And I think, the other thing that's kind of related to that is like, we had a little quick conversation off camera before, and like, you just blurted out like, oh, delayed gratification. And, I think like, so we're talking about short-term variance and then the ability to delay gratification. And like, I want to just, spend a little bit of time, like just, teasing that out in a little bit more depth, because I think the link between those two things is really that when you have those short-term negative data points, which like, if you understand human nature, humans are much more averse to loss than they are to potential gain.
100%.
And so like, we're basically wired to like avoid loss at all cost. And so when you see those like negative short-term variances, it's like, you're going to have this overwhelming desire to get out. Right. And that's why people, when they invest in stocks, the stock market starts going down and then they do a fire sale and they end up losing. And
Yep.
if you basically go through a financial event like that and do nothing and watch things go down, you're going to do better than someone who tries to time the market or who reacts to that internal fear mechanism that's trying to like help you avoid loss. Right.
100%.
And like, I actually interviewed a guy who wrote a book on this, who he's like also another financial planner who like talks about, mindfulness and investing. And like part of that mindfulness is just the ability in a very Buddhist way to refrain and go through some of those negative feelings and not do anything. Now you use the word delay gratification. What is that? How do you process that in your mind, right? Like how does that work? What do you do when you are having those bad feelings?
I think this is more for me a personal and a kind of a mindset, but you can relate this to investing. You can relate this to anything that you'd like. And here, my story is this with delayed gratification. I remember very clearly, about 13 years ago, I joined an emotional intelligence course and I wasn't happy where I was at. And what I ended up doing in that course was realizing like, holy crap, I really need this. I want this training. I want this to become part of me. But I really also want to start building a business. And, I want to just start growing my business of flipping homes and all that. But what I realized in that moment was that, if I stayed 2 years of just coaching, I just, again, did kind of like the intern thing, but I did it as a coach for emotional intelligence for free for 2 years, just to get it to become part of my core, because I knew that what would happen is that would like slingshot me for the rest of the 8 years. If I look at my life in the 10 years. So that 2 years of delayed gratification of slowing down my business growth, but my mindset and personal growth, which are propel me into further. And the way I look at it is this: I knew that if I did that for 2 years, that would become a massive habit. And at my core, that's who I would become, right? It takes just practice. And I knew that 10 years from now, I'm going to thank myself earlier on for that. And so now being 13 years out, I'm very abundant and blessed because of all the things that I did 13 years ago. So, but the concept is this: time will happen. That is an irrefutable fact. So why don't you start doing things that you're 10 years, 20 years, 30 years down the line is going to start thanking yourself for doing it, because at some point that will happen. This all started with me when I started thinking about my retirement accounts, playing poker. You don't think about that. You need it for a bankroll, until I had the epiphany one day. And I don't know, I was reading some books or something. I'm always educating myself. And I just said, epiphany, I'm going to be old one day. I have to take care of myself. How am I going to do that? And so I started really putting things away into it. And now it's just really transformed my whole life. I think about my health the same way. Everything I do today is for my older self. Everything I do financially is for my 10 years, 20 years down the line. And now I've just had children. And so I'm delaying a lot of gratification. So, because I want to get things for them. I want to buy land for them, because I know eventually they're going to be 40 years old one day. So when you live in irrefutable facts like that and understand that time is coming. You need to start delaying your gratification in the short term. That's what most of us do. It's human nature just to be focused on the short term and maximize what it feels like instead of really realizing it's so minimal in the big picture, and then start putting things away for the future.
Yeah. Yeah.
That was a
No, great.
long-winded answer.
Yeah. No, but it was really great. So I just, have another question on the like the emotional coaching, or like the internship that you did there. Like, that's so fascinating. I've never met anyone who's like done that before, other than like, let's say, life coaches. But I feel like a lot of people who say they're life coaches like never actually went through a lot of that like kind of heavy
agree.
lifting. So like, tell me, like, what are there any like takeaways, or is there any kind of thing that you can say about that? Because I feel like it's going to be super interesting.
Yeah, I actually wholeheartedly agree with you. Everyone is trying to be a life coach, and just like a lot of professions, I would say that 95% of them are bad. And it really drives me insane, right? Because you really, whatever, I'm not going to get into it. But what I've really learned from emotional intelligence is we are emotional creatures. I don't care how analytical you are, we are emotional creatures. We make our decisions in an emotional state as children, even as adults. And I'll give the best prime example of it. When you're 5 years old and you're in your first classroom and the teacher calls on you for an answer and you say the wrong answer, what happens, right? Every kid starts laughing at you. You feel very embarrassed. You shell up and you make a decision at 5 years old. I'm never raising my hand unless I have the right answer, right? Even as an adult, that programming is still happening. Why? Because you made a decision when you were 5 and you reinforce that pattern over and over and over and over again. So who's making our decisions? A 40-year-old adult or a 5-year-old child? Well, really, the answer, if you don't raise your hand, if you don't have the right answer, it's a 5-year-old child. And so emotional intelligence is going back and understanding what emotion took place to really shape your life. And then the work that I did, which I loved because it was really super intense, they would put you in emotional states. They would literally try to trigger you to get you into an emotional state, whether it was good or bad, to make a new decision in that moment. Because most of us, like Tony Robbins says, you only make a strong decision when you experience enough pain, right? And so I'm not saying that they torture you or anything, but they put you in an emotional state that you can make a new decision guided by a facilitator. And I just loved the work so much because it made me a better poker player. And I knew it was going to make me a better man overall. And so now you're able to process your feelings and understand that your emotions are your emotions and your thoughts are your thoughts and your actions are your actions. And they're all different, where a lot of people convolute it all together. The next best thing that I really realized, and while coaching, which is so important, and I don't think enough people do this, it's called results-based coaching, right? So like Terrie, like let's say you and I were working together while I was still coaching, you'd come to me with a 90-day plan and here's your goals. I'm going to push you as a coach to make your goals really uncomfortable for you. And what's going to happen is as you start to go for those goals, sometimes if it's really juicy or really hard or you're subconsciously against it, you're going to keep butting up against the wall. So anytime we meet, we would meet about 3 times a week, is like, hey, well, why haven't you done it? And then there's some excuse or some story, as we would call it. And then we would have to do is figure out why you're having that story about you not being able to do it. And then you get deeper and deeper into the emotions behind it. And then we try to discover, where did that come from? And then what are we going to do differently? And then you have that little mini moment. And then you just say, okay, well, what are you going to do differently next time? And that means just what new habit are you going to start creating from now on? And then it's my job just to hold you accountable to that new habit and reinforce it. So that's results-based coaching. That's emotional intelligence, results-based coaching, which is incredible. And then also one last thing I'll say about that is that, please, if anyone's a life coach here, stop letting your people off so easy. It's like a gym instructor. Like if you're in the gym, you hate your gym instructor that pushes you to your limits, but then you respect them and love them because now you've gone farther. But when you're buddy and you let them loose and you have fun and they, don't do as many reps in the moment, you're like, yes, I don't have to do that last rep or set. Thank you. But then you don't get the results you want. Okay, done.
Wow. Basha, coach me. Like, I'm sold, man. Where do I sign up? That sounds really intense. And like, I think you also just did a really good job of like, kind of, encapsulating that in a way that's clear, that like, I felt like I knew exactly what you were doing. And like, no, that sounds really cool. We're kind of like running out of time. And there is one more thing that I want to get to, just because you alluded to it earlier. And I want you to go a bit deeper. Like, you mentioned this business of aggression, right? And it's a very masculine word, as someone coming from combat sports, like I am familiar with aggression and maybe like having it not get the better of me. So tell me exactly what you mean by that. Like you use it in a kind of like, a poker context where like you have to take risks or else you're going to get eaten. And I think there's a similarity in real estate that at a certain point, you just analysis paralysis, like you have to just make a decision and then force yourself despite discomfort to move through it. But like, I don't know if I would necessarily describe that as aggression. So maybe you can kind of just like walk me through how you mean that.
Sure, absolutely. I guess the way I would mean it is that, let's say you're in martial arts, right? So if you're always just defending and you're trying to block kicks and punches, you're never going to win the game, right? So at some point, you're going to have to go on the offense. You're going to have to be aggressive. You're going to have to do a kick when someone tries to do a punch or something. You're just going to have to move forward. You're going to have to be aggressive in the sense of you have to make a move, right? I don't mean being aggressive by being uncontrolled and loose and all that. In poker, aggression means if I see weakness in you, I should, even if I don't have the hand, I need to make a move on you or a bluff on you, right? In the real estate world, what I mean by aggressive is that if you find a niche or you find something you have to, you're going to have to sign the paperwork. Like analysis paralysis, you're going to have to be aggressive enough to go after it. And so what I mean by aggressive is I feel like everyone has really good ideas. I believe that everyone is smart and everyone has good ideas, but you got to put that energy behind it and be aggressive about your goals, right? So like for what I do within my companies, there's an opportunity that we had that I don't think will be around in 5 to 7 years. And I never meant to build a company with my partners, but we did because we wanted to be aggressive in the sense that we're conservatively aggressive. We're going to go buy deals that we know that are going to be great 10 years from now. We hold on forever. But we could have just stayed back and been very happy with our lives on how we did it. But we just said, hey, there's a bigger opportunity here. So we wanted to be very aggressive. And that's what I mean by it's a controlled offense, right? Understand what your plan is, understand what you need to do to win the game, and then go after that vigorously. Like, don't ever get complacent. Don't ever get complacent in any aspect of your life. Yes, you should sit back and enjoy the blessings that you make around you and contentment. But if you have a goal that's very clear, and you're very vision driven like I am, go get after it. Also, one other thing I want to say by that is, let's say, for example, you have a goal and you need to potentially, let's say, hire somebody, but you're now stuck of like, oh, I don't want to pay the 6-figure salary. I don't know what to do. But you know that that's what's going to unlock you to get to the next level. Be aggressive. You have to do it. You have to make those kind of decisions. And I don't ever let anything get in my way of my vision with my company and personal life, family life, anything like that.
I mean, it sounds like, if I was looking for synonyms, it would be like either extreme proactivity or like, massive action or like take risks, right? Because like I think that's what it comes down to is like this fact of, you can tap into that aggressive energy because it's a fight or flight, right? And like very often when we see something that's uncomfortable for us because there's a little bit of fear lurking behind it, like you have a choice to either fight or flight. And like if you get into flight mode, like you're going to either shut down and go deer in the headlights and like do nothing, or else you're going to turn around and run away and tell yourself a story about why that was a wise decision in the moment. But that what you need to do is be able to tap into that fight response instead. And that doesn't mean like go ballistic and like, do something that is actually really the textbook definition of aggressive, but it does mean to use that energy as a way to move forward more in like a fight and conquer mode than in a turn tail and run or like shut down mode.
I agree. Yeah, you said it really well. I also, this brings up another thought of, I think a lot of people try to hide from different emotions. Like anger can be used. Don't go be angry and, like a menace to society. But there's times where I feel angry. And I will legitimately say when I get angry, in business terms, I get better results. When I played poker, I got better results. I understand the chemistry behind it, because when you're angry, you have more adrenaline going to your brain and it makes you more hyper focused. So I understand that. And so things can always be channeled. And that's what emotional intelligence is about. So I'm not saying be aggressive and go be a dick, but be aggressive about your goals.
Yeah, no, definitely. And like, I think this also like fits nicely. I knew we were going to have stuff in common with like the poker and the martial arts background, because like, for us as martial artists, when you're competing, like part of it is to get yourself into that optimal zone of arousal. Right. And so like, if you're too sleepy, it's not going to work. But if you're too amped up, so like either too aggressive or too anxious, it's also not going to work. And so like, if you're somebody who has a tendency to be like kind of too sleepy or like not forward moving enough, then maybe an energy like anger might be something that you can channel and be useful. Now, if you have anger management issues, like maybe you want to be like working on bringing that level of arousal down. So it's
Yeah.
also a question of like knowing your kind of profile and like what holds you back. Like, is the block for you the fact of being maybe too aroused, or if it's being like under aroused, then how do you kind of like pull yourself up to a level where you're going to be in that zone to keep you accountable and moving towards your goals? So
Absolutely. It's in poker, we called it a controlled aggression. Like, don't just go and bet everything off and just try to bluff every single time. Be very diligent about picking your spots. And when you pick that spot, go for it, right? Like, get your read down, kind of like probably what you do in martial arts. If you see somebody, a tendency of doing something, you got to go for it. You got to go for that opportunity.
yeah, absolutely. Don't be scattered all over the place. But like when you see an opening, take it, because if you don't, she will,
100%. 100%. Yeah.
Anyways, Pasha, thank you so much. This has been like a super enjoyable conversation. I know I got a ton of value out of it.
Thank
Listeners, if you enjoyed it, go and look Pasha up. Where can people find you if they want to learn more about what you do?
You can just go to LinkedIn, Pasha Esfandiari, or you can go to my website for my business, which is evocapital.net. Yeah.
You sure?
Oh yeah, I almost forgot my own website, but yeah, no, it's evocapital.net.
Well, it was that good of a conversation.
Yeah.
Pasha, thank you so much for sharing this time with me.
Okay. Thank you, Terrie. Appreciate it.